Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to Biala, the Rash Acts of Rescue and Escape. This is an event of our monthly series, Flight or Fight, Stories of Artists Under Repression, which is generously sponsored by Allianz Partners. I'm Rachel Stern, Executive Director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art based in New York. We research, discuss, publish, and exhibit artists whose life and work was affected by the German Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945. Born 1903 as Szenehaja Torakowska in Biala Podlaska in Poland, Janice Biala immigrated with her family to New York in 1913. As an artist, she became known as the American in Paris. I'm excited to introduce today Jason Andrew, who researches and represents Biala's estate. He's joined by dancer and choreographer Julia Gleich, who will bring voice to the letters of Janice Biala. Welcome, Jason and Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, for having us. And what an amazing opportunity for us to participate in this program series. The topic today is one that we've been researching for quite a long time, and we've really never had the opportunity to tell the story of how Biala rescued Ford's library manuscripts and then got herself out of Germany just as all of Europe was being consumed by war. Biala's life with the English novelist Madox Ford has the making of an epic novel. The relationship bookend the decade of 1930 from the start to the finish. As one of the shaping spirits of modern literature, Madox Ford was an editor, essayist, critic, advocate. The Good Soldier and the Tietjens trilogy are acknowledged masterpieces. And as the editor of the Transatlantic Review, the monthly magazine that circulated only 12 issues in 1924, he had the unique and influential impact. He had a unique and influential impact on early 20th century literature, publishing early works by James Joyce and Gertrude Stein, as well as many others. And it is this archive that Biala was able to rescue and secure for his legacy. Upon his unaccepted death, this is a harrowing rescue that Biala made, and daring, as she traveled back to the south of France. And thanks to her letters, through her letters, we can tell the tale, one that has never been told before. Ford and Biala moved around a lot. They kept Toulon as a home base, and from there she would able to recap what was going on in her life to her brother, mostly sending letters to her brother in New York. But this presentation has been put together chronologically as best as we can. But we leave generous gaps that may amount to impressions. I'm grateful to Max Sanders and Sarah Salam of the Madox Ford Society for their ever helpful fact-checking on Ford, movements of Ford. Peter Freeby, our teammate here at Artist Estate Studio, for his technical support. And of course, Hermine and Helen, nieces of Janice Biala. And of course, my colleague Julia, who is a return figure, bringing life and voice to the letters of Janice Biala.
It's a tall order.
Okay, I think we're going to dive right into our slide presentation.
All right.
The extraordinary life and work of Janice Biala stretched 8 decades and spanned 2 continents, a transatlantic life between Paris and New York, and one that extended well beyond her time with Ford. Her art retained an intimacy rooted in old world Europe with a totally modern sensibility. An exhibition of her work dating from 1952 to 1962 is currently on view at the McCormick Gallery in Chicago through this Saturday. Next slide, Julia. A Russian immigrant, she was born Szenehaja Torakowska in 1903 into a Jewish family living in a small village tucked alongside the River Biala in what is now southeast Poland.
She's so sweet there.
She is. She arrived in New York with her older brother and her mother on September 26, 1913, reuniting with her father, a tailor. The family lived on Ridge Street where she became one of the millions of immigrants and tenement dwellers on Manhattan's Lower East Side. As brother and sister, Jack and Janice shared a unique bond that lasted their entire lives. You could call it a sibling rivalry. Despite the many obstacles, they shared an optimistic vision of the future. While still teenagers, they moved to Greenwich Village, where they reclaimed a shortened version of their original family name, Tworkoff. A chance encounter with the paintings of Paul Cézanne and Henri Matisse in the spring of 1921 at an exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum was life-changing for both of them. It was the first time French painting was on display in America. This experience, coupled with their discovery of Edwin Dickinson through a single painting on view at the Winter Exhibition of 1922 at the National Academy of Design, enforced their desires to become artists. And it was in fact Biala's insistence that the pair hitchhiked their way to Provincetown in the summer of 1923 to meet Dickinson. It would be through Dickinson that Janice would hone her artistic temperament, technique, and discipline. Jack and Janice maintained what could, and this rivalry and work continued through their friendship continued throughout their lives.
Letter to Jack, Monday, January 27th, 1930. I decided to change my name in order not to be confused with you. My name is now Biala. If I am going to continue painting, it's not a bad idea.
Opinionated and tough, Biala was a free thinker of the highest order. She had passion for life that fueled a rather obnoxious societal independence. A true bohemian, Biala longed for a time when she would be free from the confines and restrictions of family and society.
If I ever get $100, I'm going to Europe and stay there.
The Three Musketeers was her favorite book, and she would later say that it was because of Porthos that she became an artist. Biala's situation grew even more critical with the Wall Street crash in October 1929, when she, like many Americans, felt the enormous struggle to survive. Work was scarce, yet she managed to support herself through various jobs.
I got fired at Macy's and realized myself that I don't fit into that sort of thing.
Moreover, Janice realized that painting was the only thing she could do well.
If there were anything else I could do, I'd do it.
Then in April 1930, at the invitation of a close friend, the aspiring poet Eileen Lake, Biala left for Paris. This is a photo of her. This is the original passport photo. 5 days later, Biala arrived at the apartment of English novelist Madox Ford. She and Eileen had accepted an invitation from a friend to attend one of Ford's regular Thursday salons. Biala went with the hopes of meeting Ezra Pound, but when Pound never turned up, Biala found herself sitting next to Ford. Friends close to Ford reported knowing straight away that Ford had fallen in love. Biala too was taken by Ford, and before long, the hours stretched into days and then into weeks. Nearly a month would pass before Biala wrote to Jack. A brief postcard to him mentioned nothing of Ford, though by this time, Ford and Biala had become an inseparable pair. 4 months into her stay, Biala finally broke the news to Jack.
Letter to Jack, August 11th, 1930. This is the third letter I've started to you, and I only hope it doesn't share the fate of the others, which were not mailed. So much has happened here that I'm in despair of ever being able to tell you of it. I am in a hell of a mess. In short, I don't want to go back to America ever. And what has finished off my misfortunes is that there's another man on the scene. He is Madox Ford and seems to be a celebrity here. I never heard of him myself or read his books. I don't suppose you have either. Anyway, he wants to marry me or something. And I'm sorry to say, I return the sentiment, which is even more fantastic than it sounds, as he is considerably older than myself. And I dread the talk that will arise even more than the talk that there's been in Paris. As the family's concerned, I should think being in Europe, I could, with a few well-placed lies, announce a marriage to them so that they'll stop worrying over me. He's got enough Jewish relations to make me feel easy about passing him off as a Jew, though if they ever saw him, they'd see right away he's a fake. Anyway, his brother-in-law is a rabbi, and besides that, I'm so up to my neck with him, I couldn't get out to please them, even if I wanted to. I'm sure you would like him. Anyway, he discovered and first printed Joyce, which ought to recommend him to you. And he's a friend of Picasso and Matisse and thinks Picasso is the greatest painter in the world, which ought to please you. Also, he's supposed to be a great cook and is a great authority on wines. He's just finished the first volume of a history of the last 50 years, which stands a good chance of not being published because of its communistic tendencies. And he tells the funniest stories in the world. And to wind up the description, he looks like a meal sack. Ford made a letter to Picasso to come and meet me, but he'd just left town, so I didn't. Anyway, I suppose I'll meet him some other time. We're going down to Toulon on the 1st of December, and that's the hangout of all of the French painters. I'll tell you about it. And for Pete's sake, write me, Janice.
When Biala met Ford, she said, "My life began." She described their decade together as a long, passionate dialogue. In Biala's words, she was
taken in hand by Ford,
and led through the towns and cities that he adored, shown the secrets of the world that only someone as steeped in history as Ford could share. Through Ford, she was introduced to the best of European culture, socializing with artists and writers, forging a new modernism, particularly Brancusi, Matisse and Picasso, and Ezra Pound and Gertrude Stein, who
a
were
hateful bitch, by the way.
Significant as it may have been to move among these great artists, Biala retained the essence of herself, affirming,
"For the first time in my life, I'm convinced that I am really an artist."
Catherine Ann Porter described Biala as a little creature, thin, young, and too much acquainted with hardship and trouble for her years. Very mature of her feelings, full of Jewish melancholy. Her description continues, when she at her best she is a very serious painter, and she does the most amusing sketches of Ford I ever saw. Pound found her rather modern, and her niece, Hermine Ford, remembers her as a truly radical person who didn't follow anyone's rules about how one should live their life. We're going to show a few of slides, a selection of 8 paintings that Biala made during that decade of the 30s. This is the first. It's this first image that we're seeing right now is a self-portrait. Here is probably those that know Ford Madox Ford, one of the most famous reproductions of Ford. Portrait of a Critic, she called it. He's reading a book, Cézanne, if you look closely up in his hand. Here is Provence, one of her favorite places to visit. You'll look at the aqueduct because it'll appear again in the 50s. If we get time later today, we'll show you. Here is capturing her first bullfight in 1934 that Ford took her to. And here is a street scene. It could possibly very much be the building where Ford and Biala had an apartment. This is in the Phillips collection in Washington, D.C. This is in the collection of the Centre Pompidou. Ford's history and March of Literature, Biala was very much involved in what he was writing in during their time together. And I think that also transferred into her capturing this battle scene. This is a work that's still in the estate, a view of the Seine. Here's a place where they would have one of their favorite cafes was there. And one of my favorite paintings. This is actually an oil on board. If we would look at the size, it's 25 by 31 inches. This is one of the paintings that Biala rescued in one of her trips to the south of France. Biala was a rejuvenating force for Ford, becoming his most important muse and critic. Ford biographer Arthur Meisner wrote, "Ford quickly discovered Janice, a kindred spirit who shared his complete devotion to the arts. Even better, she was a fighter, ready to fly at anyone who was not ready to give Ford his due." And Ford biographer Max Saunders called Biala Ford's, quote, "first thoroughly bohemian partner, caring little for money, social status, and domestic comforts. Her dry humor matched his." This is the Villa Paul where they set up their home, really. This photograph is inscribed in the back. It says, "Our path to the sea." In January 1931, Ford and Biala began regular sojourns there, while where this photograph was taken, Toulon was their place, and village in the village on Cap Brune. I'm sorry. They had, and from there they had their view with the sea below them, which Ford described as, quote, "like ruffled satin, and Mistral sings in infinite number of lays in Latin." Biala embraced this bohemian life, well, mostly.
Letter to Jack, November 30th, 1931. Bohemianism is a career itself. It takes too much out of you if you want to do anything else. But that's how life is. Ford says he's a very tolerant man, but I must wash my face at least once a week. And he hangs up all my clothes.
The lack of money was constant, as evident in the letter where Biala describes when the pair set off for Germany in the fall of 1932. Ford was to write another essay for Harper's about revisiting the Rhineland that he had come to know so well.
The house we lived in on the Rue Vaugirard was to be torn down. Everybody was asked to pay their taxes by a certain date, months before they would be normally due, and move out. This was very inconvenient. We were about to leave for Germany. There was no time and no money to do both. A choice had to be made. Germany won. The apartment, with literally everything it contained, was left to the tax collector. Not a saucepan, not a dish, absolutely nothing was taken out, just a $4 easel. I might add that the furniture, all Louis XIII in that apartment, would bring fabulous prices today, like Tietjen's Ford new furniture.
With widespread Nazi rallies in Germany, Ford wrote, "We really didn't get much out of that trip to Germany." Italy, too, was becoming more and more aggressive, with black shirts promoting fascism and fear. Visiting Rapallo to see Ezra Pound prior to their trip to Germany, Biala wrote,
Letter to Jack, August 18th, 1932. We were in Italy a few days. They seem badly hit there, but still, there's no comparison. Of course, there, wherever we went, we saw black shirts. Pictures of Mussolini stenciled on every wall, wishing him long life. We never mentioned him by name. It was too dangerous. But Ezra Pound said he'd done some good. Germany, of course, is evidently going fascist, with the unspeakable Mr. Hitler as head.
This photograph captures that meeting with Ford and Ezra Pound. Hitler's rise to power was something Ford and Biala watched with fearful intrigue. When he became Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933, their concerns amplified. Ford took it upon himself, at the great encouragement of Biala, a Jew, to use what contacts and stature he had to garner influence. The first opportunity came in February 1933. Theodore Dreiser asked Ford for a piece for the American Spectacular. Spectator. Spectacular. In a postscript to Ford's unenthusiastic response, Ford asked, "Do you suppose you would like a little article about the Jewry? The state of Jewry, which in Europe has become pretty perilous with the arrival of Hitler and the closing of Palestine. I was a little responsible for the Balfour Declaration in 1917, and I have for a long time wanted to write something about Zionism."
Letter to Jack, March 20th, 1933. We are not worrying about anything just now, but the Jewish situation in Germany, which is awful. It's like the Middle Ages come back. Ford's been frantically writing to all the English papers, asking if they'd let him write about it, with the view of starting a movement to make the British open Palestine for the Jews, or to allow them to come into England.
Ford had written to the editor of Daily Mail around March 6, 1933, asking if he could write a center page article on the, quote, case of the Jews in Europe. He made a similar request to the editor of the Daily Telegraph on March 13th.
So far, no success, but he's determined to do it, if he has to get to England himself to manage it. In the meantime, he's asked to be made a member of the French committee, and I think in the next mail we'll receive a reply in the affirmative, I hope. There are rumors of war here, too, between Germany and France, of course. Hitler is doing all sorts of things on the frontier. I must say that's the only war I could see myself in sympathy with. But of course, if somebody would kill that loathsome animal, it would be even better. I dislike Germany anyway.
With every passing day, news only prompted further response.
Letter to Jack, April 25th, 1933. Ford made every effort about the Jews, but everyone refused to print him, and the article he wrote on Germany for Harper's last October was carefully cut and trimmed, so there isn't a thing against Germany in it or about the Jews. And diabolically, they just printed it so that it looks well for Germany. The despairing thing about it is that the editor of the magazine is a German Jew himself, and he is responsible for the cuts. However, the French haven't stopped their efforts, nor has England, and you must have seen that England's offered Palestine for the Jews. All this has intensified my feeling about being a Jew, which has been growing ever since I've been in Europe. I don't know why, unless here everyone is race conscious and unashamed and proud of whatever race they are. And it's made me feel much more sympathetic with the feeling of our parents. It must be hell for them, all this, and thinking at the same time that we prefer Christians to Jews. I, for one, am not only boycotting German goods, but Germans as well. I don't ever intend to speak to one ever again. They're nasty people and dangerous to the peace of the whole world now or ever.
They grew even more discouraged.
Letter to Jack, October 18th, 1933. All the cruelty and misery of the world comes from lack of imagination. And so I think that only the freeing of the imagination will save us, and that only art can do. And that, incidentally, is why I hate Germany, because they have a mind for facts, and facts always lie.
In September 1935, the Nuremberg Law passed, decreeing that only Aryans could be full German citizens, and October 2nd, Italy invaded Ethiopia.
Letter to Jack, October 3rd, 1935. Both Ford and I have been working very hard since we got back, but now the weather has changed, and war is so imminent that we feel very depressed indeed. Ford is in bed, in fact, feeling unwell with the latest news, and I feel too unhappy to write. Ford says we'll have to leave here the minute the League of Nations takes sanctions against Italy because we're so near the Italian border. It would be very dangerous.
On October 10th, Ford and Biala made a quick trip to Geneva. With Italy's invasion, Ford and Biala wanted to see the League of Nations deliver its verdict.
Letter to Jack, November 26th, 1935. We went to Geneva a few weeks ago to see what was happening and were struck more than ever by the fact that it's the journalists who will make future wars more than anyone else. All the right papers here are practically owned by Mussolini.
There was nothing but war and rumors of war around Toulon, and they found the noise of airplanes and howitzers disturbing. But Ford focused on writing and Biala painting. Biala providing book covers, designs, and illustrations for Ford's books. Most importantly was their collaboration with Provence and the Great Trade Route. This illustration is included in the Great Trade Route. It features Hitler facing a wall of indigents, Catholics, Jews, communists, creatives. And this letter in particular describes her struggle, her ideological struggle to make this drawing.
Letter to Jack, January 10th, 1936. The propaganda in art I'll have nothing to do with. I insist that propaganda is one thing and art another. In the illustrations for the book, The Great Trade Route, I permitted myself one drawing for propaganda against fascism. I worked 2 months on it, trying to make it good propaganda and good drawing. I never succeeded in uniting the two. From my point of view, it's bad drawing. For yours, it might well be bad propaganda. Anyhow, at the end of that time, I was so tired of propaganda in art that now wild horses wouldn't drag me into it.
In 1937, Ford was offered a position of writer and critic in residence at Olivet College. This is a photo of the two of them there. For the next year or two, they used Olivet as a home base in America, traveling around the US and fitting in trips back to New York and Toulon. This is a photo of their visit and stay, torturing Alan Tate and Carolyn Gordon, for those of you that know the tankerous relationship that they had with them. Meanwhile, in Europe, Kristallnacht occurred on November 9th and 10th in 1938. By the summer of 1939, convinced only French cooking could ease his failing health and the tranquility of Normandy would give him clear head to meet his publishing deadlines, Ford and Biala booked passage to France on the Normandy, setting sail on May 30th. On the crossing, Ford fell fatally ill. They reached Le Havre 6 days later on June 4th. Biala found them an apartment at the port of Honfleur. As Ford's condition worsened, Biala transferred him to Clinique Saint-François in Deauville, where he died on June 23rd, 1939.
26th.
I'm sorry, June 26, 1939. Thank you, Julia.
Mm.
The first letter Biala wrote was to Julie, Ford's daughter, the very next day.
Letter to Julie, Tuesday, June 27th, 1939. I am dreadfully worried about the things in Toulon. Not so much about the furniture, though I should like to keep it, as about his books and papers. I must raise the money somehow to get hold of them. There are very few personal possessions of his. If you want anything, let me know. I cut off in the most sentimental fashion a little of his beautiful hair. If you want half, I will give it to you. I hope it doesn't spoil his looks. He looks so calm and noble.
Biala was pressed to make funeral arrangements almost immediately, and then her attention quickly turned to preserving Ford's literary legacy. As Ford so often said to Biala, "As thy day, so shall thy strength." On June 30th, Biala composed this letter to Jack.
Ford hasn't stopped needing me. I have to look after his literary life, and I have to paint too. He died very suddenly and quickly, speaking to me. I was glad because he had been suffering horribly for 3 weeks, and neither of us could stand his suffering any longer. I did my best to keep it from him that he was dying. Perhaps he did the same for me. I can't come back yet. In the first place, I want to paint. In the second place, all my history that counts took place here, and Ford is alive and with me in all the places that we loved here. I am doing everything that Ford would have done with me. If you like, I am sort of carrying on his life for him.
From Deauville, Biala stayed with Marcel and Lucie Lesson in Normandy. Then it was on to Paris and their apartment, and this letter to Stella Bowen.
In any case, if there is enough money, I will go to Toulon for our things. I am afraid I will have to abandon everything but the books, as the expenses will be too great. I've been in the country all last week with the Lesson. I arrived this morning in Paris, but I find the loneliness intolerable. So I must be near someone I know for a while yet, anyway, and going south will still continue Ford's own desires. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have his books to look after.
For the remaining month of July, Biala corresponded with Ford's agent and publishers, advocating for his interests beyond the grave. Biala's travel card is stamped July 28, 1939, upon entering Tourette-Saloup. A letter to her friend in New York, Shelby Cox, is dated August 5th and postmarked from there.
I'm writing only to tell you not to worry over me. Nothing worse can ever happen to me again. Anyway, I am horrified every time I look at myself to see that I don't even look different. I wish I knew what to tell you about my plans. I am so harassed by them. Myself, I have enough money to stay here for a few months. But gather from Ford's agent that it would be much better if I came to New York. I've been offered an exhibition in Paris and I'm trying awfully hard to work, but I know I will never make it unless I stay here. I am in the south of France, partly to pick up our things in Toulon, partly because he loved it so much. I have a few friends here and I paint a little every day. I will write again when I have any more to say.
By this time, Biala had gotten to the Ville Paul, packing as much of their belongings, including all of Ford's manuscripts, which she packed into a seaman's bag, amounting to about 11 kilos or 24 pounds, which she sent to New York, where she had arranged storage for $5 a month through her brother. A letter to Jack on August 6, 1939, confirms these details, as well as a plea to go through these letters and materials and prepare a list of documents for Ford's agent. Her letter of August 18th paints an overly optimistic picture of her state of affairs. The tone and descriptions were likely to alleviate any concerns of her well-being. She writes she writes to Jack from Tourette-sur-Loup.
I am living in a pension next door to the Wrights and the Sawyers. I have a huge, beautiful room with a huge bathroom, which I don't use. I am the sole occupant of the house, which is set in a grove of olive trees and a magnificent view whenever I lift my eyes. About 10 yards from me, there is a swimming pool where I swim every day before lunch. I paint every morning from 2 to 3 hours, and I sketch sometimes in the afternoon. I try to paint more, but I don't seem to have it in me to do more. I eat 3 full meals a day and look and feel very much better than when I arrived. I see enough people to keep me from being solitary, and everyone is very kind to me. I know Ford expected me to live his life for him after his death, and his life is precious to me. I love Ford more than ever, if possible, and I feel his love for me all around me. I do not believe in an afterlife, alas, but I do feel that the essence of someone can still exist in the people who loved that person. I carry the essence of Ford in me, and Ford's profound love for life, and I couldn't throw away a thing that was so precious to him as if it were of no value. So you need have no fears for my ultimate state of mind. Please don't, whatever happens, inquire at the consulate for me, ever.
That final line pretty much sums up how conditions were worsening for Biala. She wrote to Jack on August 26th, 8 days later.
This is a letter to say that if war breaks out, communication will probably be out for a while, so try not to worry too much about me. I shall probably go to the Leçon in Normandy, where it will be quite safe. I shall also probably try to get back to New York. It will be impossible now as all the boats are full, and due to movement of the troops, the trains will be uncertain for some time to come. I should like to stay and help, but I am conscious that I owe a duty to Ford in looking after his work, and that it would be dreadful for Mother. But whatever happens, please remember that I am sharing the fate, whatever it is, of millions and millions of people who are all equally dear to each other. The French are being wonderful. The women don't even cry when their men go. And they all say that this thing must stop sometime. I got your letter yesterday. It is rather disastrous, as the only other copy of that book is in Paris. I will try to get hold of it. I dashed off to Toulon to try to get our books and papers out. I mailed the papers to Mickey. Please ring him up to tell him so. I meant to send them to you, but I left here without your address. Explain this to Mickey too. If I can, I'm going to have Ford's books sent to New York, so don't be astonished if they turn up, and for God's sake, keep them for me safely. Please, please, don't any of you worry too much about me. I shall do my best to give you my news, but remember always that it may sometimes be difficult to get it through. I shall be among friends in any case. As soon as I know more definitely what I will do, I will let you know. Love to you all, Janice.
On September 1st, 1939, the invasion of Poland by Germany marked the beginning of World War II. Subsequent declarations of war on Germany by the United Kingdom and France on September 3rd, with strict regulations on travel and postal and control of the postal service. Biala managed to get a letter out to Jack from Tourette-sur-Loup.
September 21, 1939. I hope you both are well and that Mother is all right. She must be feeling awful about the relatives in Poland, but I think they're probably better off if they've been killed than if they're still living. There's always a consolation in the best of all possible worlds if you look hard enough.
Letter to Julie, October 1st, 1939.
My emotions about this war are rather complicated. No, I am not detached. I am really in despair. I was born in Biala under Russian rule. Then after the war, I became Polish. I only became American in 1929, and since last week, I am by birth a Russian again. I have first cousins in the Polish, French, and English armies. A few of my relatives were executed about 2 weeks ago in Janów by the Germans, and I don't know what may have happened to those in Warsaw. Your father was English, which makes me not indifferent to what happens to English. And France is the only country in the world I love. So you see, I cannot really be indifferent. But far more than a question of nationality is that once there was something resembling a civilization. On the other hand, a civilization that allowed Hitler and his hordes to come to power, that didn't, not really, you know, lift a finger to push him back to the scum from which he rose, is hardly worth saving. It is also a civilization that always starved and crucified its good men, No one but the commonplace, the cowardly, the greedy thrived in it, and the shoddy. You will no doubt think I am painting too dark a picture. From this point of view, I do have days when I am glad your father is out of it. I intend to follow his example. I intend to paint and to look after his books.
Sometime between this letter to Julie and the following letter to Ford's agent, George T. By, on October 10th, Biala returned to Toulon for the last time, this time for Ford's books. She then traveled to Paris to retrieve what she could from the apartment.
I am leaving for Paris in 2 days, and from there shall take the first boat back to New York. As this is not very easy just now, I can't say when I will actually arrive there. But if not torpedoed on the way, I hope to be in New York by the end of the first week in November. I shall let you know immediately of my arrival. So far, we haven't felt the war at all here. The blackouts are rather disagreeable, but aside from that, everything goes on in the same peaceful way as before. The only hysterical scene I have come across have been elderly ladies of American English birth who have taken a new lease on life since the wonderful opportunity for airing their courage and endurance has been given them. The French are wonderful. I don't believe any other people in the world could face disaster as calmly.
Biala's travel card indicated by a stamp that she left Tourette-sur-Loup on October 20th, 1939. Biala's final letter from France is dated November 1st, 1939.
Letter to Julie. I am sailing from Bordeaux on November 6th or 7th. I have been hanging around in Paris waiting for a boat since the 20th and for all the various permissions that are necessary before anyone can leave. I have got them nearly all, though new ones may be required for all I know before I go. My greatest trouble is in trying to get a letter from the Société de Gens de Lettres to cover the books, manuscripts, and papers I am taking with me. I was given a letter to them by an influential Frenchman, but the head of that association is never there, so I am rather in despair. Everyone is exceptionally calm in Paris. It is half empty and half the shops are closed, but that's all. The cafes, too, close at 11 o'clock, which irritates people a good deal. The people who seem to feel it most are, of course, the artists and the writers, not only financially, but morally. They say that this is a war against the spirit. I expect they are right. The museums are closed, many of the galleries, and everything of value is sandbagged. It is dawning on most people that this war doesn't resemble any other. But as far as I can see, no one is even very curious as to the future. All the Americans are gone, and for a change, one hears nothing but French. My only consolation is that nothing can ever again be so bad as what has already happened.
With Ford's literary legacy safe in New York, Biala boarded one of the few remaining boats to America, likely a freighter. By mid-November, she had arrived in New York and began the next chapter of her life. On November 26, 1939, she reported to her friend Shelby Cox,
I have finally found a place, and I am in it now. 53 West 11th Street.
So I'd like to thank Julia for bringing such life and wonderful presence to Biala's letters. We wanted to, in composing this, we worked with Peter Freeby, a guy here, and he helped compose this map of her travels after Ford's death. So we start with June 26, 1939, and then she goes to Normandy for a week. Then she travels to their apartment in France.
Paris?
Oh, I'm sorry, in Paris. Yes, thank you, Julia. Then down to Tourette-sur-Loup, where her tourism card or travel card is stamped. Then she heads to Toulon, where she makes the first attempt, and that's where she packed that Siemens bag full of manuscripts and documents and sent them to Mickey in New York. Tourette-sur-Loup, she goes back to Tourette-sur-Loup. Then on September 1st, Hitler invades Poland. September 3rd, France declares war on Germany. And then she makes a second attempt to get more of the library, which was probably mostly the leftover papers and manuscripts. She didn't collect the books until later on. Here's her final trip to Paris, where she's to rescue the remaining items there. Then she heads back to Tourette-sur-Loup. And I think this is where she was kept in, I think, in hiding. It was very dangerous for her as a Jew to be traveling. Then she heads back to Paris for one last time. And from there, she heads to Bordeaux,
where she waits and waits.
She waits.
Maybe she was waiting in Paris, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're not sure. And then, of course, her voyage to New York. So we wanted to thank you for letting us be here. It seems like we have a few more minutes. Do we want to take a quick look at what happened after?
Yeah, let's do.
Since we've got the
Just a few
images. So this is Biala, portrait by Ruy Burkhart. This is her in her house. In the early 40s, she met and married Daniel Bruceline, who was a famous cartoonist for the New Yorker. And they, in order to maintain citizenship in the US, they had to have a house here. So in Peapack, New York, that's where this photo is. That's where she had her studio. This is Biala and Elaine boarding one of the first passenger boats that was allowed back into France in 1947. He was a Frenchman. Here are some of the works that she was making at the time, early 50s. This white facade seems to almost even mimic that facade that we saw of the Seine that she had painted, Rue de Seine, where she lived with Ford. Still lifes became a fixation of hers. I think capturing life at the moment, which is how really she lived her life. I want to draw everyone's attention to that little teacup that seems to be, yes, it's not really a teacup. It's actually a little jug for milk, I think. But this was something. This is an item that she kept that was Ford's, and you can see it. It shows up here in this Nature Morte. The bullfighting was something that she continued to ravish in her paintings, I think. There's a whole series. I would love the opportunity to just show the bullfight paintings. She had an exhibition of these in 1957 at the Stable Gallery, and this was the featured painting of that work. This work was also featured in Biala Paints a Painting in Art News. It was that famous series that chronologized, that followed an artist making a single work in the studio. Here's that morning in the city with aqueduct that I was drawing our attention to, very much so like the aqueduct in this work is at the top. You can see those arches of the aqueduct, yes, at the top. And it mimics what we saw in that early Provence painting. Again, capturing the moment, living in the moment. Here's a black interior. This is in the collection of the Whitney Museum. Something that I'm drawing quite a lot of attention to. Again, there's that cup appearing, and also the fact that these paintings have a lot to do with Impressionism, which is how Ford would write his novels. It was all about giving you the impression, the angle, or the edge that your mind would then be able to complete what the picture was about. And you'll see this in the Yellow Still Life from 1955, which is on view in Chicago. White interior with a black kettle. Again, you see a bit of the influence of the abstract expressionists, gestural abstraction really taking hold in some of this work. This is dated 1962. And of course, her love of Paris never feigning. I mean, it was there's wonderful paintings of the Notre Dame, of Invalides. Is that
Les Invalides?
Yes. And then, of course, the only place she adored in the U.S. was Provincetown, and would return off and on to visit her brother there. So that's it. There's a catalog available for the show that's in Chicago. Here's the website if you want to learn more. And I think we have time for some questions.
Shall I stop the share?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Oh, Rachel.
I think I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Okay, now you should be able to hear me. I, I just said what a story, and thank you, Jason and Julia. The waving reviews are already coming in the chat, and especially your performance really of the letters, Julia, is getting waving reviews. So
they're not easy to read.
There's a reason why we keep her around here. Not only she becomes helping me pronunciate, since I have no pronunciation skills, but yeah, there we go. I did all right. I did okay.
They are difficult to read because she's very dry in many ways, and it's hard to dramatize them because you really just kind of want to read the words, but then Jason tells me that you've listened to her patterns of speech, so I'm trying to embrace all of that. So she's complicated.
Yeah. So one question that comes up, I mean, I'm glad that you also showed her work that she made after she returned to New York. The early work, you mentioned, Jason, that she was able to bring back and save one of her works. Did she bring back other works, or was she as well, or was she so focused on saving the legacy of Ford Madox Ford that she didn't care about her own paintings?
Well, that's a really good question. I think she tried to save as much of her own work because, as she said, everything that was important to her, her life to that point, was there. I singled out that one painting because I wanted people to get the idea that this is a big piece of a big oil on board. And it's very heavy. It's heavy and clumsy for me to lift. But that, along with about 6 others, including the portrait of her with the striped shirt and the front and the Spanish hat, that's one that came back. The portrait of Ford, where he's sitting reading the red book on his lap, that's one that she brought back, and that's also a very large work. So, she tried to save as much of her own work as she possibly could.
Mm-hmm. Right, and once I see that there's a huge break between her early work and the work that she made when she came back. So you said she moved to West 11th Street, which is really where the art scene was at that time, and so the question is, how much was she in contact? Of course, she was in contact with her brother, Jack Tworkov, but how much was she in contact with the abstract expressionists? Because I feel like there's some influence there.
Biala lived her life in the moment, and wherever she was able to cultivate an energy and a pulse. When she returned to New York, the first thing that she did was she went to Provincetown, where she visited Dickinson and spent a summer there. And that helped ease her into living in the United States again, I believe. The sea, the return to the sea, which is what she would do normally with Ford, helped her with that transfer. She met, as I said earlier, she met Alain, she met Daniel Bruce Line. They were kind of, I believe they were set up as on a date in Coney Island, and the two of them just hit it off. And because Alain was a New Yorker, a very well-known illustrator, he actually had the means to grant some gifts to Biala. And for her birthday, he took her to the Kooning studio, who they had known, and they knew through Jack Tworkov, her brother, obviously. Tworkov and de Kooning shared studios from 1948 to 1953. And so they became quite serendipitously, they became one of the first big collectors of de Kooning's work. Biala was one of only two other women, Louise Bourgeois and Hedda Stern, who were invited to the Studio 35 discussion, which is one of these pinnacle moments where the men met to decide the direction and the naming of this movement that they were all being labeled as abstract expressionists. So she became quite immersed in that. And then further to that, just to finish this conversation off, when she went back to Paris, she became the one person that everybody wanted to meet. If you were an American and you were traveling to Paris, they said, go see Biala and she'll get you set up. Mm-hmm. There's hilarious letters which we've read before where Biala says, you know, I'm through with these Americans. I haven't been able to paint. It's never ending. I have to entertain them. They're so needy. They're not independent. Then there's also the one where she got an invitation from Robert Motherwell. He was having an exhibition of collages in Paris. Mm-hmm. She had never received an invitation from Motherwell to attend anything. And I think in New York or ever. And all of a sudden this invitation pops up and she says, you know, it's because he was afraid that no one would show up to his.
If she wasn't invited.
Anyway, so there you go. Harold Rosenberg, the great critic, his first trip to Paris stayed with Biala. The list goes on and on and on.
Should we deal with some of the questions? There's another one.
So beautiful. Yes. And, you know, her second husband very clearly was Jewish, if I, you know, assume from his name. And Susan Schender asks whether she ever connected to her Jewish identity and how she, you know, how she connected to her Jewish identity.
It was a wonderful discovery to hear Julia read the letter where the idea of nationalism was, and she was trying to come to terms with what that was. You know, she immigrated, she came to the United States, she had to learn English. Her parents spoke Yiddish. She identified as being a Jew and Jewish. Was she regularly going to synagogue? No. Did she participate in all of the cultural accoutrement that comes around with that and the discussion? Yes. Did she want to be Jewish when she wanted to be Jewish? Yes. Did she want to be French when she wanted to be French? Yes. When she wanted to be an American? Basically, Biala belonged wherever her easel was. And that was a really fantastic quote that she said. I belong wherever my easel is, wherever that is. And as far as the politics involved in religion, and
yeah, actually, Hermine Ford just clarified that Alain was not Jewish. So
he was, I think he was Catholic. Yes,
was a wrong assumption from my side, and but she sounds very much like a global citizen. You know, the way you describe her, and that's wonderful. I'm just looking through the question. Max Saunders asks about the rest.
Yeah, I can see that question. Yeah.
Papers. Who was the guy they sent the papers to in the U.S.?
So Eileen Lake, who Biala went to France with, her husband was named Mickey or Rick or Dick, Richard. And he was the one that she was sending the papers back to. He was a doctor, and had, I understand, a bit of he had some world connections, and she knew that he could, if he sent it to them, that they would be safe.
Okay. Yeah, and then Teddy Pope asks whether Biala ever met poet Max Jacob. That's a specific question.
I don't know. I mean, we are still diving into these things.
Maybe you can help us find out.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, going back all the way to the beginning, like her father was a tailor, a Polish tailor. So they come to New York, move to the Lower East Side. From what I know, she went through through the public school system. How do how does she and her brother end up, going to museums, being interested in literature and in culture so much? Um, uh, uh, Mr. J.C. Cantor asks also whether she was primarily self-taught. So, how was her development to, until she
Yeah.
left for Paris?
Yeah. Well, we know that Jack went to Columbia. Her brother
Jack.
went to Columbia because he wanted to become a writer. He wanted to become a journalist.
Mhm.
And so he entered Columbia College, was what it was called then, in 1921. And that's the same time that this amazing exhibition of French painting shows up at the Brooklyn Museum. And the two of them went. And it was the first time, and both of them write about this influence separately. So we can kind of combine it as that they went together, right?
Mhm.
Cezanne was it for them. They were won over, and that really converted Jack. Jack really, he left Columbia. They went to the Art Students League and took classes there, like a lot of people from that period of that generation. The National Academy of Design, Biala signed up for classes there, and I think that's the connection to the fact that she saw that winter exhibition and saw Edwin Dickinson's painting called The Anniversary,
Mhm.
and it blew her mind. She had to go to Provincetown to find him.
Mhm.
And for the longest time, I thought that they went to Provincetown through Charles Hawthorne.
Mhm.
I do think, to answer your question about being self-taught, I think that, like any really good artist, they take the best techniques or the best painting ideology that they can find, whether that's going to the museum and standing in front of the painting or learning it from a teacher,
Mhm.
and then making it their own. So I think that's, Biala went to Provincetown in 1923. She ended up staying that whole summer. Jack came back to New York, and it was that summer and into the winter where she really sat herself down. There's a wonderful letter, which we couldn't keep in this presentation, unfortunately, but
Mhm.
making herself sit down, take the time, learn the technique.
Mhm.
And that was the first time she worked with oil, and that was with the assistance of Dickinson.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So Alan Mann is asking, there's a lot of narrative about their trips to Germany and Switzerland, where they saw and felt the rise of fascism. Did they get involved with any of the key figures around the Spanish Civil War, such as Gellhorn, Hemingway, and Picasso?
Well, of course, Hemingway. They knew Ford knew Hemingway from his time at the Transatlantic Review in the early 20s, and was quite supportive of Hemingway's work.
Mhm.
Picasso, of course. There's a number of letters where Biala was able to actually meet Picasso. Um,
Mhm.
Biala would travel during this time in the 30s when Picasso had an exhibition. There was a big one in Paris. They certainly went to that. As far as the Spanish Civil War, anything of world cultural consequence, they were in tune with. When they were very much aware of what was happening when Italy invaded Ethiopia. There's the letter that Julia read today, and in the subscript, which we didn't read, she tells the exact number of people, 17,000 who were killed during that. So they were very much involved and knew. I'm not sure about Glenhorn. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
But of course, I mean, the rise of fascism was something that they, we also have to remember that there were some people in France that embraced fascism. They embraced, this kind of sense of order or jurisdiction. The French politics were up in airs at the same time. The communists, the communist leanings. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is up, and I think you made a lot of new friends for Biala. And actually, the question is, where's the estate? Where can we see the artwork?
Yeah,
So that's the
sure.
last question here.
Good. Well, we happen to have a little Biala here behind us. So Tom McCormick in Chicago has a show that people can look up online. It's fully illustrated. There's also a catalog with an essay that I wrote that gives this, it's positioning Biala really as the American in Paris. I mean, it's an amazing piece of history here, fully illustrated with her images. That show will close this Saturday. Tibor Danage in New York represents the estate here in New York, and hopefully there'll be something soon.
Mhm.
But the website, people can sign up for and to follow what events there are. There's also our Instagram. Painter Biala is the Instagram, and I think you're going to be sending out a sort of a follow-up so I can share
Yes,
some of the links.
yes,
There's
yes. So
also some PDFs of some other things that we've published
yeah,
about her relationship with Ford that people can download from our website. So
And the Janice Biala website. Peter, thank you, Peter. He's
so
shared.
we'll send a follow-up email with all those links tomorrow.
well, we can't thank you enough for this opportunity. I sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity for us to be able to be involved and sort of insert Biala's place in the great canon of work that you've been doing there with the Fritz Atzer Society.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Jason and Julia. I'm so happy that you agreed to tell us more about Biala and for sharing with us Biala's life and art and her strength and resilience, creative vision, and unsentimental insistence on living in the now certainly resonates with us today. Yeah. And this month, we have two more events coming up at the Fritz Ascher Society. On January 19th, pianist Caroline Enger will perform the Mischlinge Exposé live from the Museum of Jewish Heritage here in New York. With roots reaching back to Breslau, now Wrocław, Poland, Enger's Mischlinge Exposé brings to light the stories of Mischlinge, a derogatory term used by the Nazis to describe people with both Jewish and Aryan ancestry, like her father and godmother, interwoven with the music and writings of prominent German Jewish converts and Mischlinge. And on January 27, Ori Scholtes from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and I will discuss artistic representations of the Holocaust. Until then, stay healthy and well. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.